I'd like to begin by welcoming everybody this evening to the Khairallah Center webinar series. My name is Dr. Akram Khatir. I'm a director of the Moise Khairallah Center for Lebanese Diaspora Studies, and I'm a professor of history here at North Carolina State University. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us here, this second part of our 2021 webinar series. Before I talk about the webinar series and why we're doing them, and before I introduce our esteemed guest, Helen Zughaib, who's kind enough to be with us tonight, I want to take a few minutes just to talk a little bit about the Khairallah Center. The shameless branding behind me, as you can see, tells you what it is. For those of you who don't know, the Moise Khairallah Center for Lebanese Diaspora Study is an academic research center that is located at North Carolina State University here in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's been established about 6 years now. This is our 6th year. And the mission of the center is to preserve the history of the Lebanese in the United States and beyond, and share that history through a variety of means: documentaries, museum exhibits, workshops, academic journal, and so on and so forth. And what the center does is we are building a massive archive that's online that is meant to house the memories, the mementos, the letters, newspapers, recordings, anything that tells the story of Lebanese immigrants who came here either from the 1890 through the 1920s or who arrived here in the second and third waves of immigration. And then, as I said, what we do based on this archive is we go around and tell the story. Now, part of our projects that we have been doing for the last 6 years is a new virtual exhibit, and you see it again behind my back. It's called Turath, or Heritage, Arabic word for heritage. And it's a virtual exhibit that you can find online. And my colleague, Kristen Porter, will type in the address, which is turath2020.org. If you can do that, Kristen, that would be great. And the exhibit is meant to celebrate the centenary of the establishment of Al-Rabita Al-Qalamiyya, or as it's roughly translated, the Pen League, the first literary society of Arab American writers. So the Khairallah Center, with a few other partners taking the lead, has designed this virtual exhibit to celebrate 100 years of Arab American cultural contribution. And what we did is we went beyond Al-Rabita Al-Qalamiyya itself, which is just a group of literary writers, to include musicians, artists, very much in the same tradition that Helen works in, performers, as well as talked about the newspaper and film industry and so on and so forth. And we did this to basically not only celebrate the fact that Arab Americans have been creating culture in many ways and contributing to the American cultural scene and the Middle Eastern cultural scene for over 100 years, but also to place them at the center of the narrative of America. And again, you are welcome to visit this exhibit at turath2020.org. Now, as part of it as well, what we wanted to do is we created a webinar series to, in essence, complete the narrative arc. Yes, we are celebrating cultural entrepreneurs and creatives of the 1890s, 1900s, 1910s, and 1920s, but also we wanted to emphasize that today we are incredibly privileged to have cultural entrepreneurs like Helen, who are continuing to contribute and enrich the United States and the Middle East with their artwork that is in many ways enriched by their very immigrant and diasporic experience. And so we are doing this monthly series that will continue throughout 2021 to make sure that we are also aware of what's going on within the Arab American cultural scene today. And so again, I thank you very much for being with us for this. And Helen was so gracious as to accept our invitation to be part of the series. She, as I said, this is the second part of the webinar series that we have been doing. And I would like to introduce her very briefly. And then after I do that, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the mechanics of how we're going to go about this for the next hour and 20 minutes or so, about how we're going to engage the conversation. But first, I'd like to introduce Helen, if I may. So Helen was born in Beirut, Lebanon, lived mostly in the Middle East and Europe before coming to the United States to study art at Syracuse University. She earned her Bachelor's of Fine Arts from the College of Visual and Performing Arts. She currently lives and works in Washington, D.C. as an artist. She paints primarily in gouache and ink on board and canvas. More recently, she has worked with wood, shoes, and cloth in mixed media installations, as you will see tonight. Her work has been widely exhibited in galleries and museums in the United States, Europe, and Lebanon. Her paintings are included in many private and public collections, including the White House, World Bank, Library of Congress, U.S. Consulate General of Vancouver, Canada, and American Embassy in Baghdad, Iraq, and the Arab American National Museum in Detroit, Michigan, and the Minneapolis Institute of Art. Her paintings are included in the DC Art Bank collection, and she has received the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities Fellowship from 2015 all the way to 2019. Her work has been included in Art and Embassy State Department exhibitions abroad, including Brunei, Nicaragua, Mauritius, Iraq, Belgium, Lebanon, and Saudi Arabia. She has served as a cultural envoy to Palestine, Switzerland, and Saudi Arabia, and her paintings have been gifted to heads of state by President Obama and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Thank you so much, Helen, for being with us tonight, and we are very fortunate to have you here.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Before I turn it over to Helen, I'll tell you a little bit about what we're planning to do. So Helen, in essence, has created her own virtual exhibition. She will be sharing the screen, and on that screen, you will see her journey, her art journey, and she will be speaking a little about that. But what we decided to do, because this is a webinar, is that we are going to create certain stops along this journey that will allow you to ask questions, to delve perhaps more deeply into some of the art, to ask questions about her visions for the art, and to engage as much as possible. Again, this is a webinar that we're doing, not a meeting, so all your cameras and all your microphones are off to allow for just our panels to be on. So if you want to participate, what we'd like you to do is use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. It has two little air balloons or quote balloons, and then you'll see Q&A beneath it. If you add a question there, either Kristen, my colleague from the center, or myself will notice it, and we will bring it to the attention. And there are 4 stops that Helen and I have talked about that we seem to be a rather natural part of her presentation tonight. And again, I'd like you to do for some of you, obviously, if you would like to have questions at any point, please go ahead and enter them in. If you'd like to wait till the end of the presentation, that's fine too. We are going to try to give some time at the end as well. So with that, and without much further ado, I would like to turn it over to Helen for her to begin the presentation, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Khater, and to the Khairallah Center for hosting me here tonight. What an honor to be part of this Turath. I love this, the legacy of Arab, Lebanese Americans, and continuing till now. I'm so proud to be part of this, and I love that you included us artists in there. I'm very proud of that too, not just writers. So I would like to thank Dr. Khairallah as well, and I'm very, very honored. I hope I get a chance to go and meet you sometime. And of course, all my friends and family, the people I know, the people I don't know, I am so grateful to you to tuning in tonight, for spending your time with us. I know there are so many Zooms, and but I'm so appreciative that you're spending a little bit of time with us tonight. I so hope you ask questions, and I hope you take away a lot from this presentation. And I will start right now. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to put it on here, and let me know when it comes on. It should be okay. Can you see it, Akram?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So forgive me for anybody who's listening tonight who may have heard 1 or 2 of my little anecdotes as I go through this conversation with you tonight. And I really do want it to be a conversation. This is not a lecture. For you students, this is no lecture. This is a conversation. But I titled this this presentation Journeys, because as I was working on it, and as Akram and I were talking about it, the journey from the immigrants who came to this country, and now me, my father, of course, first, and now me, I thought this symbol of the shoes, which is an important feature in my own work. I have carried this through consciously and unconsciously as a symbol in my work, in both my installations and my paintings. You'll see as I progress through my work. So I thought I'd put these little shoes up here. These are small children's shoes that I painted in acrylic gouache. And you know, the idea of a shoe, you know, our shoes that we take for granted. But if you think about it, shoes do two things. They can take us to our dreams, and they can make us also run away from danger. And I've thought about that as I've worked in my series on the migration and the Arab Spring and so on. So I thought that this is an important symbol to start with about the shoes. And just a quick background. You know, Akram said that Dr. Khater said that I was born in Beirut, Lebanon, and I lived there primarily until I was about 16. For those of you who don't know, I was evacuated with my mother and two sisters from the civil war there. In December of 1975. We left my father there, and my mother and I were evacuated, and my sisters to Athens, Greece. This is an important little anecdote that you'll carry through the thread of tonight. It happened that there was, the war was raging and there was a curfew. We hadn't been outside in I don't know how many months. We slept on the ground in our flat and we didn't go to school. And one day, the concierge of the building came to my father and he said, you have to leave your flat right now because there's two militias going to be building up there. You're going to be caught in the crossfire. We were on the second floor. We were in Hamra. We were in West Beirut, near AUB, the American University of Beirut in West Beirut. So there was going to be a fight out, a shootout. And because we're on the second floor, we were going to be a direct interference there. So Daddy decided we're leaving, and we left everything, including our animals. We left everything and we took nothing. And we ran outside and we were running. It was the first time we'd been outside and smelled the air and see the light. And I remember it like it was just now, you know, I can feel that feeling and smell that smell. And so we were running after my father. Of course, there's the sounds of the bombs and it's a curfew. We were breaking the curfew. We're chasing him to the car. And my sisters and I were running behind them. And my younger sister noticed that the other one had lost one of her shoes on the sidewalk. And we stopped and we didn't know whether to go and collect the shoe and keep running after my parents, or should we leave the shoe there? And it was like a moment, I don't know. I remember like it was like a little red shoe. I don't know what happened. I've thought and thought, I've talked about this and I cannot remember. So I don't know to this day, but we left, we went up to the Corniche, up to a hotel further down on the seafront on the Corniche. And in a day or two, the airport, we were one of the last planes to go out, and we left my father. And when my father, we was saying goodbye to us in the car, taking us to the airport, I said, Daddy, you know, when are we going to come back? And he told me that we're going to be back in 1 week. And so that week turned for me 35 years. I didn't go back. So that, just keep that in mind with the shoes, and I'm going to move on now. I come to Washington, DC after studying art at Syracuse, as Dr. Khater said. And, you know, it's a remarkable situation to see all these very white monuments that meant so much, that mean so much to people who come to this country seeking their dreams, talking about immigrants, I mean, seeking their hopes and their dreams on the incredible ideals that this country is made out of. And so I thought, you know, I am going to put my own mark on these white monuments. This is the Capitol building. That's very appropriate right now. the scene of so much in the last few weeks. And this is my version. And you see this sort of attempt at putting my own marks on there. And what I also do at the same time is invite the viewer, invite the Americans who maybe they take all this stuff for granted, but to look at these buildings and see what ideals, incredible ideas, and people that fight and try and die to come to these shores here, to re-look at these buildings that are so significant. And so this is my version of these monuments. And all of my work is in series, and I won't torture you with them, but give you a feeling of some of the bodies that I've worked now. And this is when I first came here to Washington in the early 90s. I am going to leave that and now come to 9/11. And living here in Washington, DC, and being an Arab American and 9/11 happening, it became like a re-examination of what I wanted my visual voice to be. I was thinking about it. And a lot of what I try to do and attempt to do is build bridges. I am interested in bringing the East and the West together in a dialogue. I am not interested in creating a divisiveness. I'm interested in dialogue. I'm interested in listening to other people's opinions, but my strong point of view is to bring people together rather than separate them. And I know that's hard. Everyone's on different sides of it. So 9/11 happened. And I did this piece called Prayer Rug for America. You can see my palette of blues and reds echoing the United States flag. As an Arab American, my mother is American, so I feel this divide actually in myself. It's very personal, authentic for me. And you see the shape as if you're going into it. This is a prayer rug, a version of a prayer rug with these Islamic motifs. You see the little shoes down there. Hopefully you can see them down there in the corner of the rug, as if you're taking off your shoes and you're entering into this place of introspection and think and not make judgments. And certainly after 9/11, there were many, many judgments that were made against Arab Americans. I'm not saying anything new, a lot of the media, a lot of misunderstandings. And so, you know, for a lot of us artists, our artists of Arab origin, it became like a moment, a stepping stone that we said, okay, we don't want you to tell us our stories. We tell you our stories. We're going to tell you, just like Turath is doing, we're going to tell you our stories. And so this is where I feel like voice as an artist is shaping, is moving in a certain direction, even unwittingly. You know, artists paint what's around them. So, you know, we react to what's going on. This Changing Perception series, you can see my use of Mondrian, a great Western artist, European artist that I admired growing up. I didn't learn anything about Arab artists actually in my schooling, just mostly of the Western. And I mixed that Mondrian painting with the abaya. And after we went into Iraq and Afghanistan, the issue of the veil, and they called it burqa in Afghanistan, we call it abaya in the Arab world primarily, came to the fore. And it was seen as a symbol of oppression. It was seen as a negativity, a negative. And I wanted to flip that around. So here again, using this idea of East and West and flipping it around. Here you see my nod to Liechtenstein. I hope you can see the top there. I'm not who you think I am. And I assure you, this series of paintings, there are several more of my ladies, but they opened a lot of dialogue. And they turned the conversation around on what, the idea of a veil. I mean, I had women upset with me that I was representing, that were in the, and so really, really, I think what I'm asking the viewer is to ask questions, to look at it and examine what I'm trying to say, and have a different way of looking at an issue. I think if an art is successful, the person will come away, maybe not changed, maybe they'll have a different attitude towards something. This piece also around the same time that we're still in Iraq, but the Lebanese Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri, who was sadly assassinated on Valentine's Day, when did that? In 2005. So we just marked the death of Rafiq Hariri, assassinated in a massive car bomb. Prior to that, of course, he came to Washington to have an official meeting with George W. Bush. And I was asked by his chief of staff to, they wanted to have a painting by me, a Lebanese artist, and give to George Bush. And this painting, Reconciliation, I titled it, is the image in Martyrs Square in Beirut. And it is a depiction of the mosque and the Greek Orthodox Church that have lived side by side for years and years and years, and inshallah will continue to. So I felt that this was a good piece for this idea of reconciliation and understanding. And here we are in Iraq, and it's given to George Bush at the White House. And an aside, when I got a call from the White House asking me about the painting, I tried to keep it on my answering machine for so long, until the building cut it off, because I was so excited. Like every morning I was like, oh, this happened again. I was super, super excited. Also the one with the Library of Congress, that was pretty amazing that that prayer rug was the first piece they acquired. And this piece, we'll get done with this bragging, but just to reference what Dr. Khater introduced me in the beginning, this is called Midnight Prayers. And this is, of course, the piece that Prime Minister Maliki of Iraq at the time, when he had an official visit to the White House, President Obama gifted him this, my painting. Of course, I might as well just have given up my art career at that point and said I've done it, but I'm still here and bugging you guys, talking to you. But so this was quite an amazing moment for me when this happened. The reason this piece was chosen is depicting a peaceful Middle East, a tranquility, a calmness, and all these mosaics comprising of all the thousands of different people and different identities and different ethnicities that are in the Middle East. And I brought them into one painting of hope, which is also at the bottom of much of my work. Dr. Khater, I don't know if you want to stop at this point, if there are questions, because we're moving a little bit. It all ties in, as you know, but the journey is going. So I don't know if there's.
So I think this is a very good time for us to take a couple of minutes, and because we already have one question, I have some questions that I would like to ask to bring out. So it's okay for you to keep sharing. It's a beautiful painting anyway to look at. So let me start out with a very basic question that we have somebody asked early on, and that's about the shoes. And they were wondering, is there a particular symbolism with only one of the shoes having a lace, or was it just a stylistic choice?
No, and you'll see in a further installation that I've done. That's a great question. I love that question. I thought about it very deliberately. When I did those shoes, I was thinking of all the hundreds and thousands of little children fleeing the war in Syria, right? And when you're fleeing, if your shoe has one lace or if you don't have shoes or whatever, you just put them on as fast as you could go and run, 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 run. And so the idea that there was only one shoelace and it wasn't even tied is for me adding to that sense of urgency, and leaving as fast as you can, and trying to go and cross borders and so on and seek safety from what is happening around you. So it was a very purposeful choice, and conceptually it was very important to me. I love that question.
Thank you, Helen. So the next question is both a person who said that they just love your work, but they also want to know what's your favorite piece and why. Your favorite piece to create.
How could they dare ask me that? That's
I don't know.
No, because I don't have kids, I have a nice husband and a kitty cat, but I do not have children. So for me, it's really like choosing, oh my goodness, choosing one of my favorite kids that I don't even have. But I love the question. I don't really know how to answer it, because you know what? It's like what happens when you're painting a painting, for me anyways. It's difficult to get into it. The emotion, it's almost painful, certainly in my later work now in these past years since the Arab Spring began, and takes a lot of emotion. So when I begin, it's hard to get in there. When I'm in there, I don't want it to stop. It's like a good book. I don't want to end. When it ends, I feel I feel a sadness, actually. I feel like it's already left me, even though it's not necessarily sold or it's not going to go necessarily to exhibition, but I feel it was in me, now it's out, and now I need to move on. And all these series are important to me and very special to me for many, many different reasons. I mean, the stories my father told me is a very emotional, very personal series of work. Here, I couldn't begin to tell you which one of them is my favorite. Wow, I will have to think about that, and I'm not sure I'll ever be able to answer it. They all mean something to me, and the ones that I don't want anyone to see, I hide in the closet. You'll never see them, I promise that. So it's a great question.
Thank you so much for answering that question. Now there is a technical one that asks, because you noted that you have a lot of your artwork has been given to heads of states and various people. And the question is, do you know if they keep it personally or is it added to their national art collections?
Well, I know what happens in this country for instance, when President Bush was given my painting, because the value of the painting is over, like, I think it's $25 or $50, no person in the government can accept a gift that is over a certain level. And I think it's low, like 25 or 50, I don't know, because it could be perceived as a bribe. So actually, the painting that was given to George W. Bush, is a gift for the American people. And so it belongs to the White House. It's in their collection, and it is actually in the collection of the White House. So when President Bush left the administration, he could not take the painting with him. It did not actually belong to him. For foreign heads of state, for instance, Prime Minister Maliki, the King of Morocco, I don't know what their rules are, to be honest with you, as far as keeping a gift that one head of state gave to them. I don't know what their rules are, but in America, it's very clear. If it's above a certain amount of money, which is quite low, you cannot accept it. It becomes the domain of the government, in this case, the White House. Now, the Library of Congress is something totally separate, you know. Those are also your paintings too. I mean, you can go there and that's your library. You know, you can go and study them, and you know, they're your pieces as well. Yeah, it's a great question.
Thank you so much, Helen. So I have two more questions before we go on to the next set of paintings. And I'm kind of curious myself, actually, because you
Sure.
emphasized, and I really love how you are turning these white memorials. And here, of course, there's an intended double entendre in which you are, in many ways, creating,
Yes.
covering them up in many ways, and adding to them a very rich cultural heritage, just overlaying them with that. And I'm kind of curious because you said
Yeah.
that you do all of this to have a conversation, to invite people to have a discussion, to question. And I'm wondering if in the course of doing your art presentations, in the course of you showing your art, what has been the reaction to your work?
Are you asking from that the monument series in particular, or are you talking about other? Or
Well, the Monument series is certainly one that is
okay,
very, clearly very striking. But in general,
yeah.
where you are gently provocative.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I love being gently provocative. Yeah, I love that. The monument series, I was respectful. This is something that I do. I am respectful. I'm not trying to insult anybody. I was speaking at the University of Maryland some years ago, and I showed that one of the slides. I was speaking with an Argentinian artist, and I was showing the prayer rug for America, and inadvertently it was flipped on the screen behind me, which I couldn't see. I mean, I just assumed that it was behind me, and well, there was a military vet in that large audience who stood up, and he was very upset with me because he said that the flag, the American flag, I had turned it around. He was saying to me, not even insinuating, he was saying to me that I had insulted the American flag. So I turned around, I looked at, and what I realized later was that it had been inadvertently twisted around. So it looked like, and he said this is very offensive to military vets who have the American flag on their jacket. That doesn't happen very often. And I certainly gently provocative, but not disrespectful. And to the point where in all these weeks now since the January 6th event at the Capitol, as the day wore on, and my husband actually happens to be a Capitol police officer, and we were all concerned about his welfare as his colleagues as well. Around 6:30 at night, I decided I'm going to post that picture of the Capitol on Facebook and see what happens. And as a moment of celebration, we have a new administration. We feel like we can take a breath. We're moving on to some extent. Yes, we've undergone this horrible situation. We're picking up the pieces from that. Well, I'll tell you what, I got probably more comments on that piece than almost anything I've ever done. So people get it, and they get that I'm not being disrespectful. I'm just adding a little color. I'm just putting a little something on it, But I love that question. I hope I answered it. I really do try and be mindful of that, of respect. I don't try, I gently provoke, but I don't try and poke somebody in the eye.
Thank you so much, Helen. It's a fantastic response. Really appreciate it. I'm going to
Yeah,
ask you one more question, and then we can move on
sure.
to the next segment.
Okay. Yeah.
And this question is from Maggie, who's asking, why did you choose to have the woman in the hijab, blonde with kind of teary eyes? So I was
Mhm.
wondering if you can answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, that is also very intentional. And there again, most of Lichtenstein's women were blonde. If you look at most of his work, I mean, this ideal of a woman is beautiful if she has blonde hair. Of course, I do not. And so I just thought it further pointed up that irony, and further made the viewer be able to look at these two seemingly divergent, because when you think of the Arab world, of course, there are many blonde women, in Syria, there are white skin. They have blue eyes. You know, there's no stereotyping for what somebody is looking like, but I did it very intentionally with this idea of the East and West, and this sort of stereotype that we have that blondes are in America or Western European looking and so on and so forth. And again, to flip it with the abaya. So it was an intentional move.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Helen. So I think
Great
this is a good time for us to move to the next segment. I know there are a lot more questions, but I really want to move on to the next segment, and I'll
Okay.
try to get those questions
Okay.
later. So please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, thank you. So now here we are. It's in the early 2000s, 9/11 has happened. And as we spoke about earlier, Arab Americans are trying to begin to, you know, tell their own stories, get their own versions of it out there before it can be stereotyped negatively, mostly in the media, and misperceptions happen. So as it turned out, I was invited for an exhibition, and, you know, I had been thinking about this for a while, but the opportunity presented itself to me. It was supposed to be a solo show. And I offhand told the gallery director, oh, I would love to paint my father's stories. And for those of you who don't know, my father was born in Damascus, Syria, under the big Syria. It was all one country. Lebanon was part of it. It was no borders. And Daddy was born under the French mandate there and in Damascus. And then he moved to Lebanon, Mount Lebanon. And then finally he immigrated to America at the age of 18. And so, you know, his stories and his life, he always told us his stories. I mean, for him, this is the word that Dr. Khater and I discussed the other day. The word is hakawati. Hakawati is a storyteller, and it's primarily an oral tradition. It's passed down from generation to generation orally. It's not written. It's not written. And certainly in my father's case, as the Hakawati, and it's a revered position. It could be an elder in a village. In this case, it's my own father. My brother and my sisters, and now his grandchildren are lucky to have him as the Hakawati. And, you know, you begin the story. I don't know if you know, Ya Akram, Kan Ya Makan. There was not. Shall we tell stories or sleep in our cots? I mean, this is the way, you know, it begins. And then Daddy would tell us these stories. And they were stories about the family, stories about his early life in Damascus, in Lebanon, immigrating here, relatives, all these things, traditions that were imported, morals, parables, things that would further educate us that we're not going to get in our universities in America or school. So I asked him, could I paint his stories? I went over to my parents' flat. They were next to me. I went over there, very excited. And my mother and my father were standing there, and they received me. And I said, you know, Daddy, I'm so excited. I would like to. And he just says, no. And he turns around and walks away. And my mother and I were left there looking at each other. And she said, go back to your studio and we'll call you later. I'll work on him. I'll talk to him. So about an hour later, I get a call to go back there, and he agrees. But it was like pulling teeth. He felt they were private. He felt they were not interesting to people outside the family. And we proved him wrong, actually. We proved him wrong, which is hard to do with my dad, but we proved him wrong. And so thanks to my mom, he began writing down the stories. We have a book now called Stories My Father Told Me. And this is one of them. They're 24. I'm going to just have just a few. And each painting has my father's story. His true words, those are his words, his memories, his stories. This one, for instance, to give you an idea, this was like a village wedding. And so here you have what's called the zafi, the musicians. The zafi is the band or whatever. They're playing durbeki, they're, going up, and they lead the bride on a horse by her groom to the mother-in-law, who's up there in the right-hand corner. And the tradition, and which is still carried out, is that the two mother-in-laws will conspire to make a very, very sticky dough called khamire, and they put the dough of the door, so when the bride enters it, the dough is supposed to stick. If it doesn't stick, God help everybody. I don't know what happens at that time, but I assure you, Daddy told me that the mothers make it very, very sticky. It's impossible that it can fall down. And that means the wedding will stick. The other tradition that the bride will be doing also is the mother-in-law gives her a pomegranate, and she will then step on the pomegranate and spread the seeds of the pomegranate all over. And that is indicating, fertility, children, inshallah, grandchildren, and blessing the house with future generations of children. This one, oh yeah, I'm going right from the wedding to the baby being born, but this is the birth of a baby. And so you see here the woman in bed. Traditionally, she would stay actually for 40 days in bed. And she is holding the baby. On the baby, they pin a certain, what was pinned on my crib and my clothes too, what's called a hijab actually. Daddy called the hijab, where you put a little piece of the Bible or you put a little piece of the Quran, you pin it on the child to bless the child, keep away the evil eyes. And then later, as the child grows up, take that and put it on the inside of their clothing so they can keep it all the way as protective measure. I just really love that. And it would be the midwife, of course. So you see the midwife there. I put the father, who would never be there at the birth of the baby. He would be out probably with his friends playing trick track or something, or drinking coffee, and putting him there with his shoes, they're giving his shoes, smoking the hubbly bubbly or the shisha. And then traditionally the village people would come in, pay their respects to the new baby, the mother, and be served a dish called mughli. And then when the child reaches the first tooth, later on, another celebration to mark the growing of the child, they serve to the people coming to pay their respects of the tooth, isnainiye. And my father did both those for his grandchildren. The birth of the grandchild, he made mughli. And then when Laith and my nieces got their first tooth, he made snainiya. And also, I love cats, and the kitty would never be on the bed too. I just, artistic license, I snuck kitty in there. I jumped, there are many of those stories left, and we wanted to talk about this one because it got some attention prior by Arab News, and Rawa Talas wrote a beautiful article about this painting. So honored by that. This is called Coming to America. This is at the end of my father's journey and the beginning of a new one for him. So when my grandmother Teta, who's there in the middle, she received passage from America to come to the United States. She got permission. So this ship called the Vulcania was an Italian ship that was confiscated by the Americans during World War II. And that ship sailed Palestine and Lebanon and Syria, picking up passengers who had received permission to come to America. And so you see here my teta in the middle, and to the, I don't know how my dad standing there, even though he was 18, he looked like a little boy, and my Aunt Mary. My Aunt Selwa was not permitted to come because she was, the Americans had an age limit on the ship, and she was sadly not able to come. She is in Jordan now. And my dad, he's 93. When he told me this story some years ago, he remembered this day, and they stayed up all night. They heard that they were going to see the Statue of Liberty around 4 o'clock in the morning. So all the young people like Daddy, They stayed up all night to see the Statue of Liberty and greet her and greet the dawn. And my dad, when he wrote the story, he said, I remember that it was a clear day. It was very, very poignant. If you remember, yes, stop. Well, yes, there might be some questions.
There are a lot of questions, so I thought this was a good stopping point because we're going into a new series that you've developed, and I think there may be questions specifically about the stories my father told me. So I already have a lot of them, so I'm going to go through a few of them, and I have a few of my own as well, if that's okay, Helen.
Sure, of course.
So one of the questions that is more general, that is necessarily specific to the series that you just shared with us, which is absolutely beautiful, by the way, is that you mentioned that you never learned about Arab artists while you were going to college or even, I suppose, high school. But I'm wondering if you've had a chance ever since, or actually Joseph is wondering, if you've had the chance since then to explore the art and artists that's coming from Arab world and Middle Eastern world, and have they had any influence on your work or process? And I would like to add, vice versa, has your work, since it's been exhibited in the Middle East, what kind of impact has it had there?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for those questions. And yes, sadly, I mean, the curriculum, hopefully it's changed. I mean, I haven't picked up an art history book lately. I would be very interested to see what's happening in current studies of art history and world art history, and if the Arab artists, pioneering artists, contemporary artists have found their way in there. It would be very interesting to see. Or are we still European centered and focused on, you could go into a lot of things like Orientalism and so on and so forth, and misconceptions and so on. But I mean, that's an interesting question. I myself, my study, because we lived in Iraq, and Kuwait, and Lebanon. My parents collected the early, they're called the fathers of Impressionism in Iraq, in Baghdad, in the late 50s. Daddy was collecting. We have some beautiful, I grew up in my own home looking at Arab art. That's what we had. We didn't have European art. That was, inside of me, part of my DNA. And I'm very grateful to that. But that was just because we were living in that. And so we have some very prominent pieces from Iraq and Lebanon and so on. As far as so I can say that over the past, years that I've been living in America now and exhibiting many, many different Arab artists, Arab American artists, exchanging, having this conversation with them. I think we all learn from each other. We all kind of steal from each other. We all are inspired by one another. And so I have noticed that certain pieces of mine have worked themselves into other artists that I felt like, hey, excuse me, I thought of that first. I mean, that's on a level that is, a competitive level or what have you. If you want to think about it, it's a sign of respect for my work, coming from Arab artists that I have not met. So that has been a double-edged thing, but it's it shows what the internet does, and this massive spread of ideas and images out, which certainly weren't happening 20 years ago. So that's inevitable, but definitely for me, and because as an Arab American, we could talk about labels too, what have you, but because I'm in this group, this umbrella, I'm many times paired with them. So it's my milieu, if you will, many times, not all the time, but it is. So I think our conversations are good rate, and I think we make up for what we didn't learn in school about artists, certainly artists. And there is more documentation.
Sorry, Helen, your internet appears to be dropping a little bit, I'm afraid. So you seem frozen.
On Arab artists, there's more.
I think there are a couple of the last comments that we missed, Helen, because your internet dropped, but that's okay. I think, we can move on to the next question.
Sorry.
No, 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 it's all right. I think it's
Okay.
just
Okay, sure.
your signal probably is just getting a little slow, but that's all right. So I want to move on to the next
Fine.
question, and I think this one you may be answering a little later, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it now anyway, if that's okay, Helen. And this is from
Sure.
Kate. And Kate says, your work reminded me a lot of civil rights era paintings, specifically Jacob Lawrence and
Oh.
William H. Johnson. Did you take any inspiration from this era or other civil rights movements? I knew you would enjoy that question.
I love that question. I love that. I feel like we should jump ahead, but you're right. We're going to come to that, Kate. Thank you so much. That is the hugest compliment to me. Those artists I didn't learn about until I came to Washington, D.C., actually. And as it turns out, my work using the squash is very flat, two-dimensional way of flattening my subjects, and the surface of the painting is similar to what they do as well. And so I am so proud that you've put me in the same sentence as both of them. And next month, actually, I'm invited to be in an exhibition of Jacob Lawrence, amazingly, 10 of my pieces, 10 of his pieces, and they will have a conversation at the American University in Cairo at the photographic gallery. That's coming up, so other people are seeing that as well. And you'll see a more direct answer to your question in some of the next slides that are coming, but I love that.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you for answering that. I'm going to ask a couple more questions before we go on, because I want to get to that next segment in which you show that direct connection.
Yeah, it's coming.
So and this perhaps is another question that pertains to what you just spoke about, is what influenced your technique in the two-dimensional figures that you create? What is it that makes you create these two-dimensional figures?
Mm-hmm. Well, for one thing, I'm not interested in being photographic or realistic at all in my work. I mean, I might as well then be a photographer, could express it better than I could in my painting. The paint that I use, I love it because it can achieve this quality of flatness and purity of color. I mix my own colors, but I can control it, and I can make it do what I want it to do. It takes many years to do this. A lot of artists don't use the paint that I use because it is frustrating and it's difficult to make mistakes. And I use it very flat and try not to have very many strokes in it, especially in the larger areas. That's very difficult to do. But I think also too, living in the Middle East, I was inundated, as I said, with these works of art, with the carpets, with the tiles, with the ceramics, with everything that I saw was imbued with these patterns and these motifs. And they're primarily two-dimensional. And some are decorative and some are more figurative. But I think it's just growing up and seeing that all around me and feeling comfortable with that. And I feel like, in a way, it gets me more freedom in my work. When you're translating a piece into patterns and colors, it's in a way, you like it, it gets you, it's more freedom. I don't know how to explain it better than that, but I'm not beholden to a certain image, I hope that answers that.
Oh, no, that's a great answer. Thank you so much. So perhaps we can go on to the next segment, because I think a lot of these issues are going to be addressed equally so much though. So please go ahead.
It will. Okay, thank you. And thanks for those questions. So, said that I didn't go back. My father said we were going to go back in a week. It turned to 35 years. The first opportunity that I had when Americans could go back after the war lasted into the 90s. I was supposed to go back in 2006, and for my first time. And when I was supposed to go back, we had the war with Hezbollah and Israel. And so the airport was closed and there was no way that I could go back. And I was so incredibly devastated by that, devastated by what was happening there, but also my own personal devastation that I had difficulty painting actually for the first time, and I couldn't work. And then I remember looking at a photograph, a piece of the newspaper was beside my drawing board, and I had a woman in Lebanon who had lost her son. And it's a very typical image that you'll see in wars. You'll see the woman, they'll come out to public, they will have a picture of their son or their father or their brother or their husband that they have lost. And when I was looking at it and her tears, I thought, wow. And I thought of Picasso's, you can see echoes here of Picasso's Guernica here. He did a series of weeping women, but it was about the women that he tortured himself in, emotionally tortured in his relationships with them. And I thought of that. And I, here again, using a Western artist with the abaya, you can see my reference to the kafia, the red kafia in the back, the kafia, that the scarf that many people wear in the Arab world, it's red and black. You see the pain on her face. And so this one began a series of so then in 2010, to go back to Lebanon, and I'm to be a big show in Beirut, in downtown Hara actually. And first time I'm going to go back to Beirut in 2010 and Syria and see where my father was born, and go to Jordan and see our relatives. So I began painting that. I titled Journey Home Back Again. And this idea of home, which Dr. Khater and I were talking about prior to our panel tonight, the idea of home. Where do we belong? I call it circle home. My Arab friends just call it Beit. And Beit is an Arabic word for home. And according to my father, it had a much larger and much more expansive definition than the mean your larger extended family, it's mean your community, your village, this idea of a community that is your quote unquote home. So the first piece that I did for that is this piece is began in the middle, and I moved out and out these concentric circles. Turned out to be very painful for me to actually do. I mean, my hand was cramping up so badly, and what the heck, this pain in my hand. And I thought, how appropriate. I am about leaving. I'm going back to that time, which is a very, very sad time, leaving my father, leaving everything. And so the pain in my hand, actually, it felt like I'm getting it out in this particular piece.
Welcome back. We are talking today with Helen Zughaib, Arab American artist, about her work. And in the second half of our webinar, we will be discussing the work that she has done in relationship to the Arab Spring, in terms of the Syrian refugees, and the intersection of her work with the work of African American artists in the United States. Welcome back, Helen, and thank you again for being with us today. So let's start and talk about Arab Spring and how that influenced your work.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me again. Happy to be welcomed back by you and the participants. And I think when we left off, I had come back to America, and shortly after I came back from the Middle East, the quote unquote Arab Spring began. And so as an artist, I began to document my feelings and what was going on, not knowing that 10 years later, I would still be documenting the crisis, the war in Syria, and the migration. So here we are, 10 years later, marking this quote anniversary of the Arab Spring. This is the first piece I did. You see my shape of the abaya in the background, and I used the flower motif as a point of optimism and hope and change. And I decided to keep it in my work as a reference point and continuity. So here we are, and you see that the deterioration is happening fairly rapidly in, especially in Syria, and things are not going the way that we had hoped in the beginning. And so you see the use here of my imagery to Guernica, Picasso's famous painting of the Spanish Civil War in 1935. And this agonizing, almost beseeching use of the flower, her fingernails, echoing the painful realities that the Arab Spring is not as hopeful as people wanted it to be. This piece here is called Displacement. It is a large triptych, and you see the movement of people from right to left and left to right, moving out of their villages now as the war encroaches on their communities and their families, and they begin fleeing in very, very, very large numbers. So this piece is called Displacement here. I also began collecting the newspapers and anything that had to do with the Arab Spring or the uprisings. I started collecting. And in this piece, what I did is here again, the shape of the abaya as a motif that I use. And I began at the bottom with headlines. This comprises about 2 years here of headlines. And you see the escalation in the war in Syria and seemingly having no end in sight. And of course, as we know, it is ongoing till today. And so here we have a chronological from bottom to top acknowledgement of what has been going on, this collage. It was an intended series that I stopped at this one. This piece is a large piece called Generations Lost. You see that my women are all facing the viewer, which is a little different for me. And I am really asking you to pay attention at this point. I am asking you to look at these women. I'm asking you to think about them and what they're going through. You see that they're holding up these pieces of paper. I've had lots of questions on that. There's a vague shadow of a person, an image. In general, I was thinking about their fathers, their sons, their brothers, their husbands who have been lost. I also think here about the long arm of trauma and war. It doesn't end even if the bombs have stopped. The trauma and the shock goes through the generations that come afterwards, and people often don't think about that. There's a lot of effects after leaving or after experiencing the bombs stopping. I also refer here to the big problem, and not very talked about problem, of the disappeared. And I know many wars have experienced this, but there is a huge, massive problem of people going missing and not knowing whether your relative is alive or dead. And it's a horrible, horrible tragedy. So here again, this painting is imbued with quite a lot of emotion here. This piece is an installation that I did, moving off the canvas, if you will, and onto a physical tile, which I painted these tiles that are reminiscent of the beautiful, beautiful patterning in old Arab homes and Damascene patterns that are being destroyed in the wars. I also use this idea here of the beauty and sophistication of these patterns that grace these old homes to indicate the civility and the, the idea that there are doctors, there are lawyers, there are engineers who are being forced to flee their homes. So here is a shattering of infrastructure, a shattering of their lives, a shattering of their homes, a shattering of their world. And I call it pieces of you and not them, specifically to engage you. You know, it's a massive problem, a huge, huge amount of people killed, displaced. It's very hard to wrap your head around it. This piece kind of speaks to that. With the massive numbers and the height of the war, I could barely contain them in my head. So I created this installation called Eat the News. This is a full dining room table with a Damascene cloth from Syria. And what I did was I incorporated my newspapers onto these plates with enamel. And there was this very famous picture of this little boy on the ambulance, and it caught people's attention for a little while and rallied people to look again at what was going on as the numbers increased and the devastation became so hard to assimilate. So I thought about this idea of how do we actually consume the news? How do we let it enter into us? What do we do once we get it? And here I'm asking you almost to consume it, to pay attention and bring it down to the level where it's on your table and you really cannot avoid what is going on. And so this idea of vastness, of destruction and displacement, and also the idea of intimacy, even with these little dots. This piece speaks also to that concept of as well. The title, The Places They Will Go, is a twist on Dr. Seuss. I'm sure you all know about that. The Dr. Seuss book, Oh, the Places You'll Go. And that book really shows us that we have our dreams ahead of us, that nothing is impossible. We graduate, we look forward to our dreams. We look forward to being able to attain our dreams, not just something, we feel we have the right to do that. Well, here what I'm doing is flipping it around. And these little shoes, I began painting the whole summer before little Aylan Kurdi washed up on the Turkish shore, which we'll get to in a little bit. But these shoes, some with shoelaces, show this flipped around concept that these children won't necessarily get these dreams that we all feel that we deserve in some way. And to the contrary, they do not deserve to be in the position they're in. And here the idea of shoes, as we echoed in from the beginning part, this symbol of the shoe, which is so important, to the point where in the Zatari camp in Jordan, where about 40,000 refugees are, there was a very famous tent called the Shakespeare tent. I don't know if you'd heard of that, Dr. Khater, but it was some Lebanese who decided to teach some of these children Shakespeare and to act in a Shakespeare play. And you think, well, that's completely crazy. I mean, they don't have food, they need this, they don't need Shakespeare. But to the contrary, what it ended up doing was empowering them and changing their outlook and the idea of control over their lives. But the reason I bring that up is because one of the first things they did for those kids who entered into the quote unquote Shakespeare tent, which it became known as, is they gave the children a pair of shoes. They gave the kids a pair of shoes. It was a sign of dignity. And I just have never forgotten learning about that. So here again, you're referring to something that we take for granted, these little shoes. Doctor, if you want to,
So I think this would be, Helen, I think this would be a good place to allow our audience as well as myself to ask you a few questions about the series. First of all, it's just absolutely beautiful and phenomenal and very poignant. And I really appreciated what you said about the trauma of violence, because far too often, like you said, the camera captures, a minute, a few seconds, or even if it captures an hour, but then the trauma of an explosion that shreds the social fabric for years, for decades, for a generation is completely ignored, and we go past it very quickly. And you're forcing us to stop and appreciate that. But here are some questions that I think, that I'd like to ask, and also that some of our participants are asking as well. It seems that you, in your work, especially about the Arab Springs or the Arab revolutions of 2010, 2011, that you center women in a very powerful manner. So I'm kind of curious about that. What is it that you're trying to get across by centering women in your art as very iconic of these movements during the 2010 and 2011?
Yeah, I really love that question. I mean, one, I am a woman, so that is ultimately where I'm painting from and my perspective as a woman. But two, more importantly, let's face it, in any war, it's usually the women that are the ones that are left surviving because their men have gone and fought or fighting or dead or in prison. And so it's the women that are left to pick up the pieces. They are the ones that are responsible for finding bread and food for their children and their family and shelter. And wow, if they're lucky, education. But they're the ones, many of them haven't even been working outside the home, so they have to reinvent themselves, so to speak. But why I center it on women, I want to do two things. I want to let the audience realize that that is where the society ends up it's the women's shoulders who the burdens end up falling on, as well as the idea is that we need to pay attention to them, to empower them, to continue to do everything we can do to support them mentally, whatever it is, because they are the ones that are carrying the mantle for the future generations. And they really are the ones that are shouldering all of what has gone on. And so I see women as a symbol, a powerful symbol of hope, and also of resilience. And of course, beauty, which I always imbue them with. So I love that question.
Thank you so much, Helen. So as a related one, and something that has come up in previous questions that the audience had asked before, in the first segment of this conversation we're having, the stories my father told me was part of that conversation. And you referred a lot to the memories beautifully and eloquently evoked by your artwork and the retelling of your father, of his childhood in Damascus. And some of the audience was wondering, what influence did your mother play in your artistic work?
I love that question. No one has ever asked me that before, but yes, my mom is a very strong supporter of my work. And oftentimes she kind of acted as a counterbalance to my father's immediate word, which is no. So no, you can't. No, you can't do this. No, you can't have that. No. And so my mother would gently sort of persuade him to think about it another way, to let's look at this a different way, and let's give Helen a chance to do what she wants to do. So my mom is a very strong supporter, my father as well, but it was my mother who agitated for the stories to be written by my father, and so that I could paint them, so that we could have them until today. And as I mentioned earlier, for future generations to learn from and hold on to, because people forget. But that's a great question.
Thank you so much, Helen. We
Yeah.
only have about 12 minutes left of this webinar, so I really want to be able to kind of wrap it up by the next segment. And I believe the next segment will be talking a lot about Syrian migration of refugees. So I was wondering if you can walk us through your art and how it tries to represent that aftermath of the Arab Spring.
Yeah. So here we are at the series I called Syrian Migration. We have about 46. I'm not going to show you them now, but this is a series I did over the last several years based on the great African-American painter Jacob Lawrence, who is now gone. But he painted the migration, the great migration of African-Americans from the rural South to the urban North in a series of 60 panels that he narrated. And so very simply, he documented the movement of them, about 6 million from World War I up until about 1970. This is my first panel echoing his. This is the beginning of the destruction of the revolutions in Syria, beginning in March. It will come up tomorrow in March, this as the 10th anniversary. Here is something that people forget about, is that Syria was suffering a major drought over the years prior to the uprisings. And so almost at the same time, about 1 million farmers moved in from the outskirts of Damascus into Damascus, of course, the capital of Syria, which really exacerbated the uprisings. Here again, if you look at Jacob Lawrence's work, which I hope you'll do after this segment, you'll see my references here. Of course, his are birds and mine are fighter jets. Of course, they're fleeing. Here again comes my use of collage and imagery, and sometimes a photo can really speak volumes. This is a piece because the hospitals were being bombed, so they went underground. You see this makeshift hospital in a tent. You see my little girl. I always put bows on the little girls, and she's crying there, and the bow has fallen off. And it was a painful one to paint, actually. They continue to flee. This piece here refers to the siege of Halab, or Aleppo, which is the second largest city in Syria. And it was very, very devastating, cutting off food, fuel, electricity, water. And you see my little kitty cat down there. They resorted actually to eating cats. They were so hungry. This refers to the imprisonment and disappearing. This is the word that I've written here, hriya. I don't know, hopefully my Arabic is legible, but I also did this with a nod to the Egyptian revolutions in the beginning with their graffiti that really became symbolic of the movement, the protests. Here you see the movement of people into Europe and Turkey as they were fleeing in massive, massive numbers. The refusal and of entry to the millions, thousands, hundreds of refugees trying to seek safety. They were stopped at borders and many times mistreated, and certainly created a whole system of us versus them and the other, which echoed through administrations all over the world, actually, including our own. This was the piece that Dr. Khader used to talk about this webinar. Here I am referring to them fleeing any way they can on these horrible dinghies that ultimately were not very safe at all. And you see, I've put the one little person in the front there. Again, I am asking you to focus in on that one person, as opposed to being seen as a large number. I'm sorry. Here we have, we're almost done now. Here we have, of course, this very well-known photograph that really captured the world's attention, I say for a little more than a few minutes, but the little boy, Aylan Kurdi, who washes up on the Turkish shore, and he's found by a Turkish officer. The irony here again is that the little boy had his shoes on. And here, I mean, the whole complete sadness of this. And I decided to put this in because, you know, we forget so quickly. The whole news system goes so fast that we forget. And I decided to paint him, and I kept talking to him in my studio. I'm like, every morning I would come in and I would say, I'm not gonna forget about you. I'm not gonna forget about you. It was very important to me to paint it for the future. Here, of course, here I'm referring to the continuing bombardment and movement of people and absolutely awful conditions in the north of Syria and Idlib on the border with Turkey. And you know, the camps there that are ill-equipped to hold so many people. And here again, like you mentioned, Dr. Khater, are this idea of women and children, because pretty much they're the ones that are left over to deal. And in those camps too, they were separating any child that was over the age of 12 and putting them in a whole other camp. This is my final piece here. It is not the final one in this series, but the final one in this slide presentation. And when I showed this to you in the beginning, Dr. Khater, you remarked on my little shoes that were so carefully placed down there in the right-hand corner of my painting, which I did almost unconsciously. You know, here again, we begin with the shoes, we end up with the shoes, as you suggested earlier. This piece refers to them fleeing in Idlib and trying to find refuge outside, even in olive groves. And again, what an irony, as the olive is a symbol of peace, as the olive branch is a symbol of humanity, of reconciliation. And the irony here, the twist that they're finding refuge as much as they can in this olive grove. If you look closely at this piece, you also see the little boy laying there he's crying, he's got tears in his eyes. So with this, I end my presentation and happy to answer questions anyway.
Thank you so much, Helen, for this incredibly powerful, emotionally moving and poignant retelling, not only of your own journey as an artist and as a human being who, you know, was forced to leave her first home and create a new home, and then face challenges in 2010 and trying to go back for the first time in 35 years. The longing that you have that comes through with the book that you did with your father, the stories my father told me, but also in this art, this gentle remembering is just incredibly powerful. And in this segment, especially when you're representing war and the tragedy of war, as well as refugees, and as you said very well, or very often, they're at best tolerated, and more often they have been rejected despite their common humanity with us. So I think you really do capture that beautifully.
Thank you.
So here are some few questions that we have before we conclude our webinar tonight. So again, I want to go back to this theme that plays out again and again and again, especially in representation, in this segment of your representation, when the women are represented wearing the abaya. And you use the abaya quite frequently. And in fact, it's probably rare to see a woman within this series anyway, in which she's not wearing the abaya. And I'm kind of curious, what is it about the abaya that you find compelling as a representation, with or without a face, with their backs towards us or with their facing us?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good question. I use it, I use it as a motif, as I've said before. For me, what I want to do, my paintings are fairly simple, if you will. I don't use that word in a insulting way, but I want you to understand what I'm doing fairly quickly. So by using that abaya motif, I will get somebody who was unfamiliar with the Arab world quickly associating. I realize that not every woman wears the abaya. Of course not. I know that. I'm not referring to anything religious also as well. I take that away from the use of the abaya, but I use it almost as a reference point, and it becomes another vehicle for me to get across my idea visually, and hopefully, more empathetically inside of your soul. So it's a motif. It's a vehicle that I use to get my point across in a fairly simple, easy way to accommodate. But I hope that answers that.
It does. It does. It's very well put. Very well said.
Yeah.
So one person is asking specifically about the reaction to the series. They want to know where it has been exhibited and whether there were any exhibitions of this work in the Middle East specifically, but overall the reactions that you've had to this very, just again, as I said, poignant eulogy to refugees.
I love that poignant eulogy to the refugees. It has been exhibited in many, many different places. And not only that, it's been on the news, on France 24. There's so many interviews in magazines. They have gotten a lot of attention, which is very validating, not just as an artist, but as the idea that people can identify, but they also can absorb what I'm trying to say. It's a heavy, heavy, heavy topic. And if the images are not, I'm sorry to use this word, appealing, aesthetically appealing in some way, I think people have a tendency to turn away. And they are not going to listen to, I don't care how poignant my message is. If you don't get the person's attention, if they're not paying attention to what you're visually documenting, they're not going to listen to you. So I'm proud to say that they have gotten a lot of attention, both in physical exhibitions and in news media across the world. They have not specifically been exhibited in the Middle East. That is coming up, inshallah. But because of COVID, a lot has been put on hold, of course. They continue to be shown here in the future. We have several things lined up. And as I said, the series is ongoing until I feel like this story has been told. But there are many other elements that still need to be painted about in this series. So it is still an ongoing series.
Well, this is a good segue to our final question that we have time for, which is your future plans. I mean, you have had an illustrious career as an artist, a very long career as an artist, and you have gone through a variety of phases. So one of our participants was kind of curious as to where you see yourself going after this period when you focus on Syrian migration and refugees.
Wow, what a question. It's a scary question. I have been wrestling with that as well. I have sort of gotten my voice since 9/11 happened here. And then the father stories, and now the revolutions, and you know, I feel like, wow, I feel like what I really want to do, part of me, at least to continue on, is actually to go to do some work on the ground. I would really like to, I'm thinking of a proposal I haven't talked about to anybody, but an idea of actually going and getting, listening and getting some personal stories, and also listening to people tell their stories of their dreams, of what is beyond this for you. You know, it's like, you're not all about war, you're not all about tragedy. Life goes on. You get married, you want to go to school, you want your children to go to school. What happens for you afterwards? And I would like to work on a series reflecting, you know, the other side of everything, because in the middle of war, life goes on. You get married, you get, I don't know if you get divorced, but you get married, you have babies, things happen, you know, you have little trials and tribulations, you still have life underneath the bombs in every war. I mean, it's a crazy thing about humanity, this double-sided, you know, this hope on the one side, and then this utter devastation. And it's like how we go through our days, what you know, how we look at our future. I feel like, to answer your question, I would actually like to go and listen. I would like to go and do some listening and thinking, and then move forward. So inshallah, that will happen.
Inshallah, indeed.
Yeah.
You know, we cannot wait to see your future works, because you have absolutely enriched us in this brief webinar that we have. And I know there's just so much more to your work, but you have truly, you know, enriched us in this moment. You have opened our eyes, our hearts in many ways, to the tragic, but also to the beautiful and the poignant. And what I find to be truly remarkable about your work is, even in the midst of tragedy, as you're saying, you find the humanity, and you insist upon the humanity of people. That is absolutely important, even as the world tries to dehumanize them into statistics and headlines. So we are so grateful to you, Helen, for your work.
Thank you.
For your pioneering example, and for taking so much of your time to be with us tonight, and with these participants. I thank you very much for all of this. With this, I would like to thank our participants for being with us tonight. And please, by all means, we hope that you will join us at next webinar in the series, the Khairallah webinar series, as part of our Turath virtual exhibit. And that will be on March 23rd with a Sudanese American poet. Her name is Safia Al-Halo, and she will be joining us. You can register for the event on the event page, turath2020.org, and click on the events page. Again, thank you so much for being with us tonight, and wish you all an excellent evening.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Khater. Thank you, Khairallah Center. What wonderful participants. Thank you.